Hi, I'm Neha Matthews, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. On this episode of Three Things, we're going to be discussing CJI Ranjan Gogoi's legacy and its impact on the Supreme Court of India, as well as why Vodafone Idea's plan to raise tariffs is a part of a much larger telecom crisis. But first, we discuss the consumption slowdown in rural households. What does the slowdown say about the state of poverty in India? And how long will this economic slowdown continue? P. Vaidyanathan Iyer, who has been tracking the political economy for over 2 decades, joins us to explain. So, I think last week reports had come out that consumption by rural households had seen about a 4-decade dip. And I think on Friday, the government also decided to withhold these findings of a survey of household consumption expenditure in this period. What you did was speak to leaders from key industries to kind of gauge whether this slowdown is a continuing one. Yeah. So what did you find?
So the government said that the report has got, huge divergences. So they have referred it to a committee. But that apart, it is a fact that over the last 5 years, we have seen that there have been no investments. Jobs are an issue. When a huge workforce comes into the labor market every year, about even if it is 6 to 7 million people a year, then also how do you generate jobs to support their livelihoods? So generally what happened was when investments were high, factories were being set up, jobs were being created, people from rural areas, because agriculture is growing at a low pace, so people from rural areas were moving to semi-urban areas and they were getting jobs, so incomes were getting boosted during a period 2000, say even between 2009 and 2012 we saw that investments were high. But post 2011-12, when the fiscal expansion stopped in India, we have been seeing a slowdown in investment. So that investment slowdown has continued even now. We haven't seen a stop in this slowdown or low investment phase for such a long period in a long time. So 7 years of no investments or very poor investments has led to a situation today where jobs is a big problem. Incomes are a problem both in rural as well as in urban areas. And spending automatically kind of reduces in such circumstances because people don't know whether tomorrow is going to be something for which they need to save money today. So people would rather save than spend, and all non-discretionary items like clothing, shoes, shampoos, those kind of things. Because people want to know what has happened over the last 1 year, because this survey
was June 2016.
Yeah, that was till 16, 17 to 17, 18. I think that was the period. So we went beyond that. And then we realized that when you talk to people that things have actually worsened over the last 1 year or so, and more so in the rural markets, which is what has surprised many people. So that was essentially what we tried to get our hands on about rural spending in 1920 in this year. How has it been? So it has been very bad.
And this was like key indicators include things like tractors. That'd be a good measure of whether rural expenditure is dropping. Right?
Yeah. So we looked at, there are 5-6 measures. There are very 2-3 direct indicators to a rural slowdown, which, for instance, tractors sales go up every year or has been rising when rural incomes have been good. So on a low base itself. So remember last year also tractor sales were low. So on that low base, we are seeing a further dip. So that is what has kind of suggested that, I think it is not yet over. So one reason probably is also that 5 states were affected because of excess monsoon and crop failures. So these 5-6 states like, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh. So these 5-6 states were affected because of, say, rainfalls and crop failures. That cannot be the only reason. So the reasons are, I think, deeper. And we see that, in Mahindra's, which has got almost, 40% or 40% is 2/5 of the entire market. So Mahindra's sales have dropped consistently and they have dropped in double digits. So they expected in the festive season that it is in October. So this year's festive season was also peculiar in the sense that both Navratra and Diwali were together. Generally, festive season spreads between October and November. It kind of overlaps the 2 months, but this year it was all October. So even in this festive season, Mahindra really didn't do well. Neither did two-wheelers or motorcycles, which are there mostly rural is a big market for motorcycles, they've also not done well. The biggest motorcycle player or the scooter player, Hero Motors, hasn't done well. So it has also seen a dip in sales even in the festive month of October.
And you're saying this is not just the agrarian crisis. You also mentioned income is dropping.
This buildup of stress in the rural market has been sustained over a long period of time. So what we have also seen is, we have seen MNREGA corpuses being maintained, but I think in many states, huge pent-up demand of MNREGA is not being met. So just an example is like, Rajasthan, where till about December, about 10 lakh man days was the demand for MNREGA works. Suddenly in the last 8-9 months, with a Congress government there, I'm not sure whether it is coincidental or by design, but the numbers show that it has gone up to 30 lakh man days. So that's a huge increase in MNREGA demand, which also shows that in rural areas or very poor people are either not earning enough, they're not getting jobs for sure because they are demanding MNREGA work. So there is very less work. So this pent-up demand is showing up now in MNREGA numbers. So rural incomes have been under stress for the last 5-6 years consistently. So when you look at labor bureaus, wage growth numbers, the wage growth numbers have more or less stagnated over a long period. And in this year, in this calendar year 2019, the labor bureau numbers suggest that the wage rates have hit their lowest in the month of August, which is the latest data that is available, and it was just 3.4%. Wages have stagnated, so incomes are not really high, not going up. So which is again leading to a compounding of the rural problem.
Here also, I think what was interesting is you pointed out that the gold imports have also reduced, and that points towards savings not being as much.
Yeah, so gold imports were going very high in the first 3-4 months. So in India, I think many people, especially in rural areas, there are not many, say, banking opportunities. So, there are agents who do the banking for you. But in these non-bankable areas, people kind of save money by buying gold because more denomination of money can be saved in a smaller size. So people would invest in gold. But now in the first 4 months, gold imports were really, going up, 30%, 40% increase in gold imports month on month compared with previous years. But last 4 months, I think gold imports have sharply come down. So in terms of value, it has come down by almost 35%. That suggests that people are not saving in gold also. So there is no money to save probably.
There's no income. So
the incomes have taken a hit, and that's why less money to save. My sense it is going to last for a while. It could be about 6 months to 12 months because there are many pieces in the jigsaw which are not yet been put together by the government. One, of course, is NBFCs. I think the resolution to the liquidity crunch, which we see at a very macro level, where NBFCs are still unable to lend. So from about 20% plus growth to a deceleration to minus 2% is a huge change which lending has seen among NBFCs. So NBFCs, which kind of made up for banks not lending, are not lending anymore. So that has caused urban problems also in tier 2 cities where people are not really taking loans, they are not spending money, they are not buying their, probably their two-wheelers on loans, or they're not buying their, 50-inch TVs. So I think those things have happened in tier 2 cities. So we need to find out more. I think, we still don't have enough data to suggest whether TVs are being bought, what numbers, whether refrigerators are being bought at what numbers. So if 165 liters is the smallest denomination of refrigerator, is it being bought in the smaller markets of tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities? That we need to figure out more. So that data is also difficult to come by. But hunch is that, though all those markets have kind of slowed down. And this probably takes another 6 months for the tide to turn.
On 17th November, the 46th Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, retired. In this segment, I'm joined by Apurva Vishwanath, who covers matters of law for the Indian Express, to discuss CJI Gogoi's 13-month term and his legacy.
So
Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi came in with a lot of expectations. So him stepping into office was right after the Supreme Court going through a huge constitutional crisis with an impending impeachment against the then Chief Justice Deepak Mishra. So when Ranjan Gogoi took over, it was expected of him that he would bring about these sweeping changes in the Supreme Court in terms of transparency and administrative reforms. That was the expectation that he came with. But the 13 months have not been easy, to say the least. So it has been as, if not more rocky than the term of the previous Chief Justice.
And like you mentioned, I think when CJI Deepak Mishra was in charge, there was a huge controversy where we saw a very historical press conference being held. Ironically, it was
Ranjan Gogoi,
Justice Ranjan Gogoi and 3 other Supreme Court judges who held that press conference. Could you tell us a little bit about that and whether during his term he's been able to shift that narrative about the Supreme Court?
So if you remember this, in the press conference, the 4 judges basically initially only talked about them discharging debt to the nation. They were being sort of cryptic in what they're trying to say. Eventually, when a reporter asked a plain and simple question, said, is this about the Loya case? It was Justice Gogoi who actually said it was. He said it was about the Loya case. So what he said was that significant cases, including the Justice Loya case, was being heard by a bench of a justice headed by Justice Arun Mishra. So that was the crux of the allegation that was made that day. If you look at what happened when Justice Ranjan Gogoi took over, I don't think that really changed. Although there was a roster, in terms of processes, what changed was that at the end of Justice Deepak Mishra's tenure, the Supreme Court started putting up what you call a subject-based roster. So it said cases of this subject will go to these judges. So let's say land acquisition go to Justice Arun Mishra, writ petitions go to the Chief Justice of India, cases relating to arbitration go to Justice Nariman. So you had these broad categorizations. The differentiating marker was not whether you were a senior judge or a junior judge, as they pointed out in the press conference, but a general categorization. So important cases did go to junior judges, and it pretty much continued the same way. So that was one allegation that they made. But after the press conference, in terms of how the court prioritized its time, that's a big criticism against Justice Gogoi, because remember that the Supreme Court doesn't have a set practice of which cases it will hear, which cases it will not. The Supreme Court is a polyvocal court. You have 34 judges sitting in different combinations, 2 judge benches, 3 judge benches. So there are hundreds of cases that these judges hear on a daily basis. So which case becomes priority is the judge's call. And as the administrative head of the court, it is the Chief Justice's call, because the Chief Justice only can set up benches and allocate cases. His term, you've seen the cases that have been in his radar throughout have been the NRC case.
Before his term as well, he was pushing for the NRC.
He was hearing the NRC case before as well, but you saw more activity on this. And in a sense, Justice Gogoi kept closing the deadlines one after the other, and he kept pushing the executive to act on these deadlines that the court had set. So there was the NRC case, and then there was the Ayodhya case, which was being heard even before Justice Gogoi took over. But there was a lot of time that just lapsed between when the appeals were filed in 2011. So the cases weren't heard for so long. But then you had the court allocate about 40 days, straight sittings, all 5 judges, including the Chief Justice. So the amount of resources, the court's resources in terms of time and man hours that went into hearing the Ayodhya case was monumental.
And this was happening alongside the habeas corpus for Kashmir cases coming in. Right?
For Kashmir cases coming in, like the Chief Justice had to sort of allocate about half an hour for the Kashmir cases and then would continue hearing till he set up a different bench headed by Justice N.V. Ramana to hear the Kashmir cases. And remember that the setting up of this special bench also came at least a week or 10 days after the habeas corpus petitions had started piling up before the Supreme Court. But if you look at these 2 cases, there's no reason why the court picked these cases over everything else. They are, and they continue to be, a lot of pressing constitutional cases that need to be heard by the court. For example, you have the case against the electoral bonds, which is now pending in court for about 2 years. So that case has to be heard by a larger constitution bench, which hasn't been set up yet. But just to be clear, this is not a criticism only against Justice Gogoi. This has been an institutional practice for a very long time. You had Justice Deepak Mishra also prioritize cases very differently. And before him, Justice Keher, he heard the triple talaq case, which wasn't the pressing issue at that time. So how the judges prioritize these cases, seemingly there's no reason for how they do it. That continues during Justice Ranjan Gogoi's tenure. In terms of appointments that were made to the higher judiciary, one positive thing that you would see during Justice Ranjan Gogoi's time is that there were far more appointments to the Supreme Court of India. For the first time in many, many years, you had the Supreme Court function at full strength, which is credit to him for making it happen. But at the same time, the situation in high courts was dismal. You had at least 8 high courts functioning at half its capacity. So that continued. But as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, the number of judges who were appointed during Ranjan Gogoi's time was at an all-time high.
Could you tell us more about the landmark cases that CJI Gogoi presided over as well? And, many of these happened in the last week, which we discussed on our November 15th episode.
Given how short the tenure of each Chief Justice is, everyone would sort of want to leave a mark or some sort of legacy behind. So you invariably have Chief Justices hearing a flurry of big ticket cases right before their retirement. So as it goes with Justice Ranjan Gogoi's tenure, you had the Ayodhya hearing and a bunch of other Constitution Bench verdicts that came out last week. That sort of marks the end of his tenure. But the biggest case that has sort of engulfed his entire tenure, which I don't think still has a sense of closure, is the sexual harassment case that was made against him. One comparison again that you can draw with former Chief Justice Deepak Mishra was that when the allegations in the medical college case were made against him, he headed the bench which said that he is a master of roster, as a master of roster has unlimited power to decide who will hear
and similarly,
cases.
He called it also a threat to the institution. He didn't see it as a threat to him.
Yeah. He didn't see it as a personal attack, but said it was an institutional threat. And this is a similar way. Justice Ranjan Gogoi also, sat on a hearing on a Saturday morning and said that there are some people trying to attack the institution. He did not see it as an allegation against him, but said that this is a threat to the Supreme Court as an institution itself. And then subsequently, although he disbanded the bench where he presided, if you remember in that Saturday hearing, although he presided over the bench, he did not sign the order. So that was widely criticized as judicial impropriety. And after that, although he did not sit on the bench was sort of handpicked by him, which was headed by Justice Arun Mishra. Subsequently, there was that internal committee that the court set up to look into these allegations, but the committee did not sort of give complainant a fair chance to present her case. She eventually refused to participate in the proceedings, but the court did not take that into account and gave the Chief Justice a clean sheet. So that sort of unexplained institutional damage that happened to the Supreme Court in dealing with a case of sexual harassment against the Chief Justice himself is something that marks Ranjan Gogoi's tenure, not just Ranjan Gogoi's tenure, I think for the Supreme Court in times to come as well.
So what has been pointed out in terms of transparency in the Supreme Court is that the concept of the collegium system of, judges appointing judges, it remained unchanged under CJI Gogoi. Could you tell us about that?
The collegium system is really that 5 senior most judges of the Supreme Court appoint other judges to the Supreme Court. In cases of high courts, it is 3 judges of the Supreme Court, top 3 judges. So you have the Chief Justice, number 2, number 3, who decide on high court appointments. So a particular high court would send, let's say, 10 names after the consent of the state government, and then with the consent of the state government, and then the Supreme Court Collegium will look into these names. After a brief interview, in some cases, the Supreme Court Collegium would recommend names to the government, and then the government would have to appoint them. So this is broadly the collegium system, how it operates. And incidentally, it's not something that is prescribed in the Constitution. This system of appointing judges has been developed through a series of judicial pronouncements. And like we know in 2015, when the government tried to bring in the National Judicial Appointments Commission Act, the Supreme Court quashed it down as unconstitutional.
That would have given the executive more role in appointing
judges.
Therefore, I think the criticism was that would have made it more transparent.
Would have brought in some accountability. We don't know if it would have made it transparent because the government would also have to disclose the reasons. But it would have brought in some element of accountability and would have taken it away from the judges a little bit.
One of the defining features of CJI Gogoi's term also seemed to be the use of sealed covers. What changed in this day-to-day handling of cases?
So what the court initially began as a practice when certain information had to be protected for just a couple of reasons, like for example privacy of an individual, or if it would impede an ongoing criminal investigation. So in these exceptional cases, the court would accept some information given to it in a sealed cover, and only the judges would take a look at it and would not be put up as a public document. But incidents of the court asking for information in sealed cover became rampant during Justice Gogoi's time and took it to a whole new level. So in the NRC case, you had the then state coordinator Hajela, give information to the Supreme Court in a sealed cover, and even the government was not allowed to take a look at it. So you had Attorney General for India, K.K. Venugopal, question this practice of the court and said, what are you trying to protect from the government itself? And despite protests by Venugopal, the court headed by Justice Ranjan Gogoi refused to disclose the contents of the sealed envelope. So you have judicial orders being passed based on information that is given to the court in sealed envelope. So you don't sort of understand the reasons as to why the court is doing or with what information the court is arriving at these conclusions.
Debt-ridden telecom operator Vodafone Idea announced on Monday that it will raise mobile service rates from December 1st, 2019. Vodafone Idea Limited said that the decision comes in the wake of acute financial stress in the telecom sector. However, it did not mention the details of the proposed tariff hike. Earlier, Vodafone Idea posted a net loss of Rs 50,922 crores for the second quarter, which is the highest ever net loss reported by a company in India. This news has the banking sector worried as well. Sources in the banking and mutual fund industry say that if the teleco fails to recover from the lows it has hit, it may put additional burden on banks and other financial institutions, and they say it is time for the government to look at the issue as the issue of India's telecom industry. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.